Hello everyone, this will be my after-action report on the Dragon StuG III Ausf. The first thing I want to say is that this will be the first build that I've done for an Armorama review that I actually am not particularly happy with my own work in, because I had some issues in the end with just these antenna cradles. So when I get to that point I'll discuss, but that's really eating at me, because normally even when I complain about the kits I'm usually pretty happy with what comes out. But this one, that's on me, so that shouldn't reflect necessarily on the kit, I don't think, so we'll talk about that in a bit. The first stage in this build is suspension, just like it is with basically all other StuG kits. You do have to locate where this return roller station is, but apart from that, it's virtually identical to every other Panzer III hull kit I've ever done from Dragon. Wheels and rollers, fine. Bump stops and suspension, fine. The only thing that annoyed me, and I actually ended up skipping, was that for this part here, on the inside of the idler, instead of the singular ring, they had the 4 separate sections of the ring, which I don't quite understand why. So I just skipped it. As you can see, there's no photo etch in there, which the hollow section there then that you can see inside of there is probably wrong, but I just chose to not deal with the photo etch. This is what I'm talking about here, where you're supposed to cut these into 4 separate pieces. And then, you know, glue them 1, 2, 3, 4 around. You know, I just didn't want to deal with it, and I don't know that other people would either. But sometimes, you know, they say photo etch is optional if you choose it to be. I don't know. Just didn't really like that. Now, I know a guy that I'm working with in Thailand who owns a lot of real StuG parts, and he didn't have an idler on hand when I asked him, but I will keep an eye out, and if there's a chance that that part of the inside of a StuG idler is done in 4 separate pieces, I will eat my words and say that I was wrong. But I think that in general, it's just better as one piece. So the rear plate was a little strange, because you had to remove an awful lot of stuff from the rear plate. A lot of it's occluded now by other pieces, but you had to remove a ton of detail from these, because I believe it was from a later version of StuG III rear plate. You had to remove so much, in fact, that the mounting points for these exhaust pipes are removed. So mine, if you look, are a little bit crooked. Now again, I've seen a lot of real StuGs, and I actually don't mind the exhaust pipes being that kind of little bit offset, because that does tend to happen to thinner metal pieces on a massively armored vehicle like this. So that didn't really bother me, but I had to eyeball that, and then that has to fit flush with these holes in the shield. So the shield actually took on a little bit of a wrong shape, because my exhaust pipes were slightly off, because there was no mounting points. Now, I could have been more careful and done that better, but in the end, that's just something that's slightly annoying. But again, it adds a little bit of realness to the model. I know that might drive some people completely crazy, though. This whole section here can actually be kind of aggravating, only on account of it's just done in a slightly strange way, because some of it has to be glued on to the engine deck or the lower part of the hull, or you can do it all separately. Mainly I'm just referring to how these 3 pieces here kind of fit into each other, but it's fine. It's just a little bit strange. Exact same rear that was on the Tauk Panzer III that I did. So then we move on to the fenders. And the fenders are a source of actual complaints. So the first thing that I would actually have complained about, because I was trying to be as not whiny in this review as possible. So if we look in close at the fenders, now I did the best job that I could filling those holes. Now these holes are on anti-skid texture. So not only is it hard to fill those, but it's definitely hard to sand them or maintain any kind of texture where you have filled them, because they want you to fill holes because these fenders were meant for a different version of StuG. So I did the best I could, and I'm sure that it will lack and show up when I paint it, but as it was for a review, I just basically did the best job that I could. The rest of the fenders went okay. However, if you look at where all these tools are placed, none of them are placed where the original fenders were meant to have tools placed. So they have you remove the locator pegs from every tool and place these things as close as you can get them to where they should be. This fender as well, you have holes to fill on the rear right there, which I did the best that I could, but it's not going to be perfect no matter what you do. Also, the little photo etch details, that seems fine. That's sort of to represent the fittings where things would have been that aren't installed. Again, the tools had to be kind of eyeballed, and then another really difficult fill job right there. A high point of the fenders is that these photo etch front fenders actually go together really well and will take some dings and bends really nicely. The next section had us dealing with the superstructure, so the way that I chose to build things was to only leave the parts separate that are this, which is the roof and this front piece, little trick I picked up from Panzermeister 36 right there. So my doors there as well are glued on, and then everything else is on the superstructure. The slings for the MP40s were actually not that hard to do, and then the little things that attach them to the walls, that actually went pretty well. Detail on the inside is a little bit different than the standard G interiors is. Like this is different. That's actually not even glued in. I just have that sitting in there for now. One thing I did have a huge issue with was marrying the stub gun from an old Panzer IV to this breech. This is actually meant for the StuG III Gs. It did not go together, and I had to fiddle with it quite a bit. You can see a little bit of the issue I had there still. Right there, this piece doesn't want to seem straight. It just wouldn't fit. And I fought it as well as I could and eventually got it pretty straight, but it did not want to be straight. The radios went together very easily, actually, on both sides, as did that binocular scope there, or periscopes. The rest of the interior, pretty much straightforward as it is with most StuG kits I've built. Now, another major gripe that I have would be these fill spots here. I had to fill holes on the sides of this radio box here and on the back, and the same on this side, so on the back here and the side there. And you have to end up gluing the antennas there, and it's just a really difficult area to deal with that much filling. Now in their instructions, you can see that this area here says, well, fill these two areas, but those are not just locator holes. Those are massive square areas. Those areas are that big, right where those lights are. How I actually did this was I cut styrene squares to fill these holes, then filled around them, and I actually had to fill it 2 or 3 times and sand it down to actually get it filled. In the end, the result is okay, but I really would not like to have had to deal with that, and I don't think this would be that hard of a piece to have tooled a new one for, so it's pretty weak on Dragon's part. Final assembly, I mean, other bits, primarily there's just these antenna cradles to talk about, and not that much else. Primarily, I think a big gripe of mine towards the end phases, they had you add these little photo etch things here, which are fine, but these things had no locator pins, again, because the fenders don't actually match this type of StuG. So I know for a fact my NoTech light's too far to the left there, and I think that headlight might be a bit wrong too. And then over here I'm not positive on the placement either because there's no locators. And yeah, it's a review, so perhaps I would have taken my time a little bit longer with another build, but that's just really, really annoying to just try to reuse parts the way that they do. So as to these antenna cradles, I have both of mine in like a slightly skewed 45 degrees because it's not quite up and it's not quite down. You see that sometimes in pictures. I couldn't find a StuG III E that had both the antenna cradles like this, and apparently only a Command would. I talked to some people about it, but I haven't seen any evidence of this. Most of the time I only see an antenna on this side over here. I'm not sure why this one has both, but the photo etch is what I had an issue with. So these pieces here, I don't feel like they explained enough to you how to bend in the instructions, so I kind of had to wing it. This one here actually broke, and I had to recreate it with just a random piece of photo etch, so that's not even correct. And then these here actually were the easiest of the bunch, but I actually messed that one up, and this one's actually flipped backwards, so that's what I had the big issue with here. Similar issues with this side, where that one should be sitting off to the edge of that intake, and it's sitting like in the middle of it, so it's not quite right. That was the worst part of the build for me, was just those cradle, the photo etch mounts for those cradles. The instructions, I could have benefited from like a proper, like a perfect orthographic view to see how I was supposed to bend them, and where I should attach them. And maybe I'm being stupid. Maybe some of you are watching this are like, well, you should just know better, but I didn't. And since I do kind of, you know, average Joe builds this kit reviews, I didn't have enough to go on from this, and it went really, really poorly for me. So we can chalk that up to I didn't know what I was doing, and maybe you'll get a better result than me. But again, if I had to do this over again, I actually would have left off one of these antennas and cradles completely, because I just don't have evidence in books that I have to prove that they were on both sides. But if you have a picture, link me to it. I'd be happy to see it. So my final issue here is the DS tracks, which I do complain about. They are just a bit too tight for me. I mean, they might be fine for people, but I'm just not really in love with the way that they sit. My plan for this particular build, if I decide to paint it, will be I'm adding winter cut into it. But just as an example, that's the profile of the way that this kit sits with the kit tracks that are supplied, which are DS. And this is it with some workables. These are Kaizen Type 3As. And I even have them on the wrong side with the metal pins showing out, but just to me it looks like a much more dignified piece already, just with better tracks on it. And I don't need workable tracks, it's just these things are so taut. And I'm aware that there are things that people sell to try to get, oops, that one came off a little bit, to try to get sag on this thing, but it's just very, very tight and can be a bit difficult. And then I just don't understand why they didn't just go with magic tracks or something, because the comparison between the two sides is in my opinion, night and day. It's like, yeah, great, paint it. And this one is like, yeah, all right, whatever. And when I do kit reviews with DS tracks, I leave them on my shelf for a long time, and they sort of just stare at me with these like odd, peach-colored, very taut tracks. And I know that they gave out some early samples of this with both, and I hope that's something they pursue. But yeah, I can't stand the DS tracks. They're too tight in this case. And they're either, whenever I get them too tight, not tight enough, or there's too many links, or, So, yeah, overall, there's no way that I would use them on the final. So, what's my final opinion and rating? Well, it's better than some modern slapdash Dragon kits that I've built, where they just use a bunch of parts, but kind of, how I talked to someone about it, and they said, so they took the F8 kit and ruined it. That's what he said. And I think that's kind of accurate. I mean, these filling hole, this is too much to fill. That's just lazy. Tracks or whatever, that's what they've been doing for a while, so it doesn't really affect my score at all. And this, again, I'll just chalk that up to my own mistakes. So in general, I'm mainly judging my score based on how much you have to fill and remove. Like, you have to remove the locator marks on every single tool on this side of the hull. I'm going to say 65. Just barely above what I gave that Taupanzer, because it's not that it's a bad result, although I feel like with my antenna cradles it is, but it's lazy, and it was difficult because they make you jump through all these hoops to make their sprues make this thing, where when they could have done is just maybe tool one more sprue or so to make it a much more fluid and enjoyable build, but they couldn't be bothered to make a new plate here or new fenders here. They're like, nah, you can just drill holes and fill all that and make that work. But if I wanted to modify a kit, I would just buy a kit that didn't make this and I'd modify it, which I do have the ability to do, but it's not what I paid my money for.